Penguin Random House Canada Audio presents Irma Voth by Miriam Toews. Read for you by Amy Rutherford.
Irma Voth by Miriam Toews. Chapter 1. Jorge said he wasn't coming back until I learned how to be a better wife. He said it's okay to touch him with my arm or my leg or my foot, if it's clean, when we're sleeping, but not to smother him like a second skin. I asked him how could that be? I hardly saw him anymore, and he said that's a good thing, for you. He said people always lie about their reasons for leaving, and what difference does it make? I blocked the doorway so he wouldn't leave, and I begged him not to go. He put his hands on my shoulders, and then he rubbed my arms like he was trying to warm me up, and I put my hands on his waist. I asked him how I was supposed to develop the skills to be a wife if I didn't have a husband to practice with, and he said that was the type of question that contributed to my loneliness. I asked him why he was trying to blindside me with answers that attempted only to categorize my questions, and I asked him why he was acting so strange lately, and where his problem with the way I slept with my leg over his leg had come from, and why he kept going away, and why he was trying so hard to be a tough guy instead of just Jorge, and then he pulled me close to him, and he asked me to please stop talking, to stop shivering, to stop blocking the door, to stop crying, and to stop loving him. I asked him how I was supposed to do that, and he said, "No, Irma, we're not kids anymore. Don't say anything else." I wanted to ask him what loving him had to do with being childish, but I did what he told me to do, and I kept my mouth shut. He looked so sad. His eyes were empty. They were half closed, and he kissed me, and he left. But before he drove off, he gave me a new flashlight with CCC batteries, and I'm grateful for it, because this is a very dark, pitch-black part of the world. The first time I met Jorge was at the rodeo in Rubio. He wasn't a cowboy or a roper. He was just a guy watching in the stands. We weren't allowed to go to rodeos normally, but my father was away from home, visiting another colony in Belize, and my mother told my sister Aggie and me that we could take the truck and go to the rodeo for the day if we took the boys with us so she could rest. She might have been pregnant, or maybe she had just lost the baby, I'm not sure. But she didn't care about rules that afternoon, so, miraculously, we found ourselves at a rodeo. Maybe it was the pure adrenaline rush of being away from the farm that made me feel bold, but I noticed Jorge sitting there by himself, watching intently, and kind of moving his body subtly in a way that matched the movements of the real cowboys, and I thought it was funny, and so I decided to go up to him and say hello. "Are you pretending to be a cowboy?" I asked him in Spanish. He smiled. He was a little embarrassed, I think. "Are you pretending to be a Mennonite?" he said. "No, I really am," I said. He asked me if I wanted to sit next to him, and I said yes, but only for a minute because I had to get back to Aggie and the boys. We had a conversation in broken English and Spanish, but it wasn't much of one because as soon as I sat down beside him, my boldness evaporated and my knees started to shake from nervousness. I was worried that somebody would see me talking to a Mexican boy and tell my father. Jorge told me he was in town buying something, I can't remember what, for his mother who lived in Chihuahua City. He told me that he had a job delivering cars over the U.S. border from Juarez to El Paso, and that he got paid $40 American a car, and he didn't ask questions. "Questions about what?" I asked him. "Anything," he said. "But about what?" I said. "About what's in the cars or who's paying me or when or just anything. I don't ask," he said. He seemed a little nervous, so we both looked around at the people in the stands for a minute without saying much. "Some people are staring at us," he said. "No, they're not," I said. "Well, actually, they are. Look at that guy over there." He was about to lift his arm and point, but I said, "No, please, don't." He told me he thought it was strange that a Mennonite girl was at a rodeo, and I told him that, yeah, it was. I tried to explain the rules my father had, but that he was out of town and my mother was tired and all that, and then we started talking about mothers and fathers, and eventually he told me this story about his dad. All I really understood was that his father had left his mother when he was a little boy, and that one day his mother had told him he was going to meet him for the first time and he better look sharp and behave himself. She said she was going to drop him off on this corner by their house, and his dad would be there waiting for him, and then they could have a conversation, maybe get a meal together, and then the dad would drop him back off on that corner when they were done. So Jorge, he was 5 years old, decided he had better clean up his sneakers, especially if he wanted to look sharp for his dad. He washed them in the bathtub with shampoo, and then he put them in the sun to dry. When it was time to go, his mom dropped him off at the corner and said goodbye and left, and Jorge stood there for a long time, waiting. The sky got darker and darker. Finally, it started to rain and Jorge started to worry. Where was his dad? Some men in cars drove past him, but nobody stopped to pick him up. It started to rain harder. Then Jorge looked down at his shoes and noticed that they were foaming. Bubbles were floating around by his shoes, and he didn't know what was going on. He was too young to understand that he hadn't rinsed his sneakers when he washed them with shampoo, and now the rain was rinsing them for him and the soap was bubbling out of them and making them foam. Jorge felt like a fool, like a clown. He was mortified. He was just about to take them off and rub them in the dirt on the sidewalk to try to make them stop foaming when a car pulled up and a man got out and introduced himself to Jorge as his father. He asked Jorge what was going on with his sneakers, and Jorge told him that he didn't know, that they had just strangely started foaming like that, and his father looked at him and told him that shoes didn't normally do that. Jorge had wanted to tell him that he had only been trying to look good and clean for his dad, but he didn't really know how to say that, and so he just started crying out of shame. And then what happened? I asked Jorge. My father told me that he loved my shoes that way, that they were great, that he wanted a pair just like them, said Jorge. That made me feel a lot better. And then we went and had some shrimp cocktail. Afterwards, he dropped me back off at the corner, and I never saw him again. Oh, I said. Where did he go? I don't know, said Jorge, but I was sure it was because of my stupid shoes that he never came back. I realized that he had lied to me. Obviously, he didn't want a pair of shoes that foamed up. Who would want that? So eventually I made this decision not to act like an idiot in life. But you weren't trying to be a clown, I said. You just wanted to have clean shoes to meet your dad. Your mom had told you to. I know, he said. Maybe it's not rational. But after that, I decided I would try to be a cooler boy and not try so hard for things. I told Jorge that I was sorry about that, but that I had to get back to Aggie and the boys. I guess I'll never see you again either, he said. He was smiling. He told me it was nice meeting me, and I said he could visit me in our field maybe, beside the broken crop duster that had crashed in it, and I gave him directions and told him to wait there later that evening. Make sure you look sharp and behave yourself, I told him, but I didn't really say it correctly in Spanish, so he didn't get the little joke, which wasn't funny anyway, and he just nodded and said he'd wait all night and all year if he had to. And I wasn't used to that kind of romantic speaking, so I said no, it wouldn't take that long. I wanted to tell him that I had tried most of my life to do things that would make people stay too, and that none of them had worked out, but then I thought that if I said that, our relationship would always be defined by failure. Jorge came to visit me a few times, secretly, on his way between El Paso and Chihuahua City. We would lie in the back of his truck and count the number of seconds it took for jet streams to evaporate. If you happened to fly over this place, you'd see 3 houses in a row and nothing else for miles but cornfields and desert. Mine and Jorge's in the middle, and on one side of us my parents' house, and on the other side an empty house where my cousins used to live, the space between them approximately the size of a soccer pitch or a cemetery. On a clear day I can see the Sierra Madre Mountains way off in the west, and sometimes I talk to them. I compliment them on their strength and solidity, and by hearing myself talk that way, I am reminded that those words exist for a reason, that they're applicable from time to time. It's comforting. There are a few little villages around here. Some are Mexican and some are Mennonite. We're sorted like buttons, and we're expected to stay where we're put. If Jorge visited in the evening, he and I would lie in the back of his truck and stare at the stars and trace the shapes of various constellations and touch each other's bodies very gently like we were burn victims. Jorge told me that I didn't have to be so nervous. "Don't you want to leave this place?" he said. "I think so," I said. "So even if your father finds out about us, the worst thing that can happen is we go away." "I know, but," I said, But then we can't come back, really. So, he said, why would you want to?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?